Salah, Son and Haaland are all unavailable for captaincy, so we're going to analyse the data to pick the best of the rest. First up on the shortlist is Saka against Palace at home. We all know what Saka can offer, but to be fair, from an attacking perspective, Palace aren't the easiest of opponents. Next up is Palmer against Fulham at home. Whilst he's a cheap player, I wouldn't let the price tag put you off. And lastly is Toney that finally returns to FPL. He faces Forest at home. There are a couple of honourable mentions before we move on, one of which is Núñez against Bournemouth away. He's too much of a minutes risk for me. I would consider him more if he was guaranteed penalties in Salah's absence, but you've got Szoboszlai and McAllister who are in the running as well. Another outsider is Richarlison who faces United away. I don't think he will do quite as well without Son in the team, and these two outsiders both don't have the home advantage. However, the three players on the shortlist do. For the non-penalty stats per 90 minutes, I've extracted Toney's data from the season that he was playing. That was based on a sample size of nearly 3,000 minutes. As you can see, he wasn't punching as high as Saka and Palmer are this season. Not only was he underperforming his underlying stats weren't promising either. I get that he's a forward, so he gets one less point for every goal scored, and one less point in the calculations for the expected goals as well, but it's still not good enough. It's actually Palmer who's got the best numbers. I get that he's not overperforming his underlying stats, which would be ideal, but still 2.8 non-penalty expected return points per 90 minutes is more than efficient, especially compared to the other two players. Captaincy aside, this data just goes to show how good of an option he is in the game, especially when you consider his price tag. He's been providing plenty of points per million, and his expected numbers display that he's probably going to continue that as well. I know a lot of FPL players will subconsciously fall into the trap of not considering him for captaincy because of his price tag. Don't be one of those people, because it's not relevant, he is underpriced. Whilst he's got the best non-penalty stats, he's also on penalty duties for Chelsea as well, but to be fair, so is Saka for Arsenal and Toney for Brentford. However, I would say that Saka's at a slight disadvantage compared to the other two players, because occasionally he does give his penalties away to his teammates. To be fair to Palmer, he's the only player that I would say is a set-piece specialist on the shortlist, because he takes direct free kicks, indirect free kicks and corners. As for Saka, he does take corners and indirect free kicks, but not direct free kicks, and it's the other way around for Toney. He only takes direct free kicks. Looking at the probability, which is based on the assumption that each player plays 90 minutes, Toney's got the highest anytime goal scorer odds, and Saka's got the highest anytime assister odds. When you combine them both together to get the anytime return odds, Saka and Palmer take the lead, and Toney only trails by 1%. So they've practically all got the same chance of success or blanking. I like that Toney's odds are weighted heavily on goals, because you get more points for a goal than you do for an assist in FPL, but that also goes against him where Palmer and Saka get an extra point for every goal scored because they're midfielders. Therefore, their weighted odds are better, especially for Palmer. Whilst he's got the same anytime return odds as Saka, his odds are weighted more on goals. On the other hand, the points projections are telling a different story. Saka's got the highest overall on FPL review with 5.8. He's also got the highest on Fantasy Football Fix with 5.1 as well. I think a tiny contribution to these points projections is that Saka's more likely to get a clean sheet point than Palmer. But I think the main reason for Saka being higher on both data models is the expected minutes. Whilst Palmer's been playing 90 minutes more recently, Saka's been a 90-minute man for longer. I've got to give credit to FPL Review for being transparent with the expected minute, and you'll see them later on in the video, but for now, it looks like that's the case for Toney as well. They've got him down as a 90-minute man. As for Fantasy Football Fix, they completely disagree. It looks like they expect him to start from the bench because he's not played for so long. If you remember at the start of the video, I said that Palace isn't the easiest of fixtures for Saka compared to the other two players, and you can visualise that now in the data. To be fair, I don't think there's much between them in the fixture difficulty ratings. I wouldn't say Forest defence is much worse than Palace. Of course, they've conceded more goals per 90 minutes, but it's the expected numbers that are better at projecting the future goals conceded than the actual goals conceded themselves. And third play to Forest on tightening up at the back in comparison to last season. Out of all the players on the shortlist, it's Palmer who's got the easiest of fixtures. It's not quite as much the goals conceded figure that counts. I know that's the joint highest, but the expected goals conceded figure is quite higher than the other two teams. To be fair, Fulham are slightly more likely to keep a clean sheet than Palace, but you've got to remember that Arsenal do have a better attack than Chelsea. Palmer's got quite a few players around him that underperform their underlying stats. At the same time, that does go against Palmer, because it means that he's got less chance of obtaining an assist, because if he does pass to a teammate that doesn't usually bury the chances, he's less likely to get that assist. Before we conclude, we're going to carry out a quick risk assessment. First of all, it's worth noting that Toney featured in the under-21s for Brentford, and he did come away with a hat-trick. You can apply your own narrative to that if you want to. But the main thing is that he did feature for 75 minutes. That was 2 weeks prior to this fixture, and he's been in training since, so he should play roughly 90 minutes. He used to be absolutely nil before he got suspended, and I can't see that being any different now, especially with there not being much competition in those attacking positions for Brentford at the minute. Saka also featured in a match roughly 2 weeks before this fixture, and that was a competitive one. Whilst that was less than a week before the Gameweek21 deadline, Arsenal actually play over a week after the Gameweek21 deadline, so if you're going to captain Saka, I'd make sure you vice captain a player that plays in that first weekend, because we will have team news on those players, and there's a lower risk of them not playing. If you have a reliable vice captain, and you want to captain Saka, I wouldn't let that factor put you off captaining him. Palmer does have the advantage of playing a day after the deadline, but to be fair, he only gets 4 rest days. That doesn't concern me though. I think as a rule of thumb, anything more than 3 recovery days is fine. I think one reason for his expected minutes to be slightly lower is the fact that he will have had 3 games in 7 days, but to be fair, the other 2 games had a 3-day gap, and he played 90 minutes in the second match. So all things considered, Tony's my least favourite option. It is between the other 2, and I don't think there's much to split them. But for me, I'm going to go for the player that's got the more promising underlying stats, and he's also been delivering on them. If his team's awarded a penalty, he's more likely to take it than the other player. Gets to take direct free kicks, indirect free kicks and corners. He's got the slightly higher chance of scoring, the better weighted odds, and he's got an easier fixture. Regardless of his price tag, I think Cole Palmer is the best captain for Game Week 21. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, and don't miss the Salah and Son best replacements video that I've already published.